Ruth Calloway drove the fence post into the frozen ground, with both hands, her breath coming in white clouds in the cold November air. And she did not ask for help. Not from the men who had stopped riding past to watch. Not from anyone. The ground was iron hard, and the sky was the color of old tin, and 4 riders had been sitting on the ridge above Calloway Creek for the better part of an hour, watching her the way coyotes watch a newborn calf that has wandered from the herd. She set her jaw. She drove the post deeper. If you believe in stories about truth, courage, and a woman who refused to be moved, stay with me until the very last word. Drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story travels. The morning Daniel Calloway died, the Powder River Valley had been quiet in a way that felt almost like mercy. Ruth remembered standing at the kitchen window with her coffee, watching frost melt off the grass in the low pasture, thinking that the worst of the season might finally be breaking. That Daniel would come back from the northern boundary with color in his face instead of that gray, exhausted worry he had been carrying since August. That they would sit on the porch that evening and she would hear him laugh, the real laugh, not the short one he used when he was trying to reassure her. By midday, 2 men from the Hargrove outfit had brought her husband home across a saddle blanket. They said he had gone through the ice on Garnet Pond, said his horse had spooked near the bank, said he had gone in fast and the current under the ice had taken him before anyone could reach him. They said it with their eyes fixed on their boots and their hands working the brims of their hats. And Ruth had stood in the doorway and looked at Daniel's boots. His good riding boots, still dry, both of them. Daniel Calloway did not ride to Garnet Pond in November. He had said so himself every year since they had settled this land. The ice on Garnet was shelf ice, he always said. Beautiful on top and hollow underneath. You could put a horse through it without any warning at all. He never rode near it in winter. He had told Ruth this. He had told every hand who worked Calloway Creek. It was the kind of thing a man said once and meant permanently. Ruth said nothing. She thanked the men. She washed Daniel's face and combed his hair and laid him out in the good suit he had worn to their wedding 6 years ago. She sent word to Pastor Ennis, and she stood beside the grave in the frozen churchyard while the whole of Benton Crossing, all 40-some souls of it, came to pay their respects. She held herself together the way you hold a lamp in the wind, cupped around the flame with both hands, not breathing wrong, not moving wrong, because the moment she stopped holding, everything would go dark. Warren Aldiss did not come to the funeral. He sent flowers instead, which was somehow worse. A large arrangement, expensive, the kind you ordered from a catalog. Ruth set them outside on the porch where she would not have to look at them. 5 days after the burial, Aldiss came himself. He came in the afternoon, in a good coat and a clean hat, with 3 men behind him, and the particular unhurried ease of someone who had already decided how the conversation would end. Ruth was at the barn when she heard the horses. She finished what she was doing. She wiped her hands on her work apron and walked to the porch and stood on the top step and waited, because she had already decided she would not go to meet Warren Aldiss. He could come to her. He was not what she had imagined from reputation alone. She had heard his name for 3 years without meeting him. Warren Aldiss, who had bought up the Teller spread and the old Moravec place and had his eye on the water rights along the upper Powder. In person he was compact and well-dressed and almost grandfatherly, with silver at his temples and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in front of a mirror until it came naturally. He tipped his hat. He said he was deeply sorry for her loss. He said it was a hard thing, a young woman alone on a working cattle operation, and that he had always admired what Daniel had built here, and that he hoped she would consider carefully what came next. Then he produced an envelope from his breast pocket and held it toward her. Ruth looked at the envelope. She did not take it. Calloway Creek is not for sale, she said. Aldiss kept the envelope extended for a moment. Then he tucked it away with the patience of a man who had been told no before and found it temporary. He said the offer was more than fair. He said land like this was a burden for a woman alone. He said he was only trying to help. He said, things have a way of getting harder before they get easier out here. He held her eyes for just a beat past courtesy. Then he turned his horse and rode back down the lane, his 3 men falling in behind him, and Ruth watched them go, and then went inside, and sat at the kitchen table, and pressed her palms flat against the wood, and breathed through her nose until the shaking in her chest settled into something she could manage. She thought about Daniel's dry boots. They came back the following morning. Not Aldiss, 2 of his men, A lean one with a blonde mustache and a heavy-set one who wore his hat pulled so low Ruth had never clearly seen his face. They rode to the fence line on the east pasture, and they sat there, just sat, for 2 hours, watching the house, while Ruth went about her morning work. She did not look at them directly. She felt them the way you feel cold, coming through a wall you cannot fix. That evening, the gate on the north pasture was open. 8 head of cattle had wandered toward the river. Ruth spent until full dark getting them back. The men came again the next morning. And the next. Always the same fence line. Always the same, flat patient watching. Never a word. Never a direct threat. Never anything she could take to the law. She went to Sheriff Cobb on the 4th day. Garrett Cobb was a large man with a face that had once been kind and had learned over the years to point itself away from things that would require it to act. He listened to Ruth with his elbows on his desk and his expression arranged into something that resembled sympathy without committing to it. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "sitting at a fence line isn't against any law in this county." "My gate was open 3 times in 4 days, Ruth said. "Can't prove who opened it. My husband is dead 3 weeks. Warren Aldiss was at my door 5 days after the burial with a purchase offer. Now his men sit at my fence every morning." She kept her voice level. "You know what that is, Garrett?" Cobb looked at his hands. "What I know and what I can do about it are 2 separate conversations, Ruth." She stood up. "Daniel always said that about you," she said, "that you knew more than you ever did anything about." She left before he answered. On a Wednesday in early December, when the cold had settled into Calloway Creek like something that intended to stay permanently, Ruth sat at Daniel's desk and went through his papers for the 3rd time. The first time she had gone through them, she had been half blind with grief. The second time she had been looking for debts, for anything that would explain his silence in those last months, the way he had taken to rising before dawn and riding out alone before she was fully awake. The 3rd time, she found it. It was not in the deed box or the account ledger. It was tucked inside the back cover of Daniel's survey record book, folded 3 times and sealed with a strip of brown paper tape. A letter, in Daniel's own hand, addressed to no one, dated October the 2nd, 6 weeks before he died. She read it standing at the desk. Then she read it again sitting down. Daniel had found, through his own survey work along the Upper Powder, that the water rights deed Warren Aldiss had filed with the county the previous spring, the deed that gave Aldiss control over the primary diversion point for the entire Eastern Valley, including Calloway Creek, had been filed using a survey map that had been altered. The original government survey, Daniel had written, placed the diversion point inside the boundary of the Calloway water grant. The altered map moved it 140 yards west, enough to put it on open range, enough to make it Aldiss's by law. If no one looked closely at the original, Daniel had looked closely. He had written, "I have not told Ruth yet. I am going to, when I have more to show her alongside the telling. I do not want to frighten her with a problem I cannot yet solve." This was probably the wrong decision. Ruth is steadier than I give her credit for. She always has been. Ruth stood at the desk in the cold house, with her dead husband's handwriting in her hands, and she felt something she could not entirely name. Grief and clarity, arriving at the same moment, one running through the other, like cold water through warm. She folded the letter. She put it in the pocket of her dress. She went to the barn and saddled her horse. The telegraph office was 14 miles north, in Garland Station. Ruth rode all 14 miles in the iron cold and sent a wire to the one address she had, the one Daniel had written in the inside cover of the survey book, next to the name, James Calloway, Cheyenne, Wyoming. She rode back in the dark. The reply came on the 2nd day. "Coming. 1 week. Don't act yet. J." She read it twice, standing at the telegraph counter while the young operator pretended to sort papers and tried not to appear to be listening. Then she folded it and rode home. James Calloway arrived on a Sunday, 9 days after she had sent the wire. Ruth was splitting firewood behind the barn when she heard the horse on the lane. She set the axe down and came around the corner of the barn and looked at the man dismounting at the porch rail. She had met him once, 5 years ago, at the wedding. She remembered a younger version of this face, easier in the eyes, less worn at the edges. What she saw now was a man in his late 30s who moved with the careful economy of someone who had stopped wasting motion a long time ago. He was lean and dark-haired, and he wore a coat that had seen hard weather, and he looked at the ranch with the expression of someone who was doing arithmetic behind his eyes. He looked like Daniel in the bones of his face, not on the surface but underneath, in the structure of it. "James," she said. "Ruth," he said. And then, "How bad is it?" "Bad," she said. "Come inside. I'll show you everything." She spread Daniel's letter and the survey record and the water rights documents on the kitchen table, and she laid out the facts the same way she had laid out the firewood, one piece at a time, deliberately, without extra language. James listened, without speaking. He stood across the table from her with his arms crossed and his eyes moving across the papers, and he did not interrupt once. When she finished, he said, "You went to the sheriff." "Yes, and he gave you nothing." "He gave me the right words in the wrong order," Ruth said. So it sounded like sympathy and added up to nothing. James looked at Daniel's letter. Something shifted briefly in his expression, something private and old. He said, "Aldiss, you know what he has on Cobb?" "I know there's something," Ruth said. Daniel believed the water rights filing went through Judge Delaney's office incorrectly, that Delaney certified a survey he never actually reviewed. "You found evidence of that?" "I found the original federal survey in Daniel's files. The numbers don't match what Aldiss filed, not by accident." Ruth put her hand flat on the papers. Someone changed them, and someone with a judge's seal said they were correct. James was quiet for a moment. He said, "They're going to keep coming to that fence line every morning until you either sell or something worse happens." "I know." He nodded once, the short, decisive nod of a man committing to a direction. "All right, I'll stay in the bunkhouse. I want to watch their pattern for a few days. How many men, what times, whether they rotate. And then we're going to figure out what to do about Delaney." Ruth looked at him across the table. "James, I need you to understand something before we go any further." She did not move her hand from the papers. "I am not looking to start a war over this. I am looking to prove what happened to my husband and keep what belongs to me. Those are two different things, and if you can't hold that line, then you should ride back to Cheyenne." James looked at her hand on Daniel's letter. Then he looked at her face. "I understand the line," he said. "Good. Because I have been keeping this place running and keeping myself in one piece and keeping myself thinking clearly for 3 weeks, and I am not going to have that undone by someone deciding patience was yesterday's plan." "I heard you," he said. "Make sure you keep hearing me." That almost became a smile, just at the corner of his mouth. "Daniel always said you were the steadiest person he knew." "Daniel underestimated me in a few places," Ruth said. She picked up the papers and began to stack them. That was one of them. They came the next morning. 3 men. The blonde mustache, the low-hat man, and a third she hadn't seen before, broad across the shoulders with the blank-faced patience of a hired man who had been told to show up and look large and was doing exactly that. Ruth was at the well. James was on the porch, sitting in the chair Daniel had always used, drinking coffee from Daniel's tin cup, watching the 3 men at the fence with a quality of stillness that Ruth would take several days to understand was not patience at all. It was compressed attention. It was the stillness of something that had learned to be very still right before it moved. The 3 men looked at him. He looked at them. Nobody moved. Then the blonde one said something to the low-hat man. The low-hat man said something back. The broad one just kept looking at James with his hired expression. James raised his coffee cup slightly in their direction, almost cordial. The 3 men sat for another 10 minutes. Then they turned and rode back without a word. Ruth came up to the porch. She stood at the bottom of the steps. "They'll tell Aldiss tonight," she said. "Yes, when he finds out who you are." James looked down at her from the porch. The morning light was full across his face, and for a moment, in the structure of his jaw and the way he carried himself, she saw Daniel so clearly that it was like a hand pressed against her throat. "When he finds out," James said quietly, "things are going to change." Ruth looked down the lane, where the dust was still settling. "Good," she said. She meant it. Warren Aldiss came the next morning with all of them. 5 riders spread wide, Aldiss at the center, arriving with the silence of a man who had already decided the outcome of every conversation he intended to have. Ruth heard the horses from the kitchen. She put down her cup and walked to the door and opened it before they reached the porch. Because she had learned in 3 weeks that men like Aldiss treated a knocked-on door as permission to enter something, a posture, A moment. She refused to give it. James was already outside. He stood at the top of the steps with his thumbs in his belt, watching 5 riders with the same quality of attention he had given 3 men at the fence the morning before. Aldiss pulled his horse up 10 feet from the porch and looked at James for a long moment. "Don't believe I know you," he said. "No," James said. "You don't." Aldiss smiled, the same practiced warmth from the surface of his face. "Friend of the family?" "Brother," James said. "Daniel Calloway was my brother." The smile stayed exactly in place. Below it, something recalculated. Ruth watched Aldiss's eyes move across James slowly, the way a card player looks at a hand he had not anticipated holding. "Terrible thing," Aldiss said. "An accident like that." "Yes," James said. And the second time he said it, the word accident did not mean what it had meant the first time, and every person in that yard understood the difference, and no one said anything about it. Aldiss shifted in his saddle, said he was still prepared to make a generous offer on the property, said a young woman alone on a cattle operation in winter was a hardship no one needed. "My sister-in-law," James said, "has a ranch and a water right that belonged to her husband and belongs to her now. She has made her position clear. Things change." "Some things," James agreed. The 2 men looked at each other across the cold yard with a dead man's name between them that neither was willing to speak directly, and Ruth stood in the doorway and felt the weight of the morning pressing in from all sides. Then Aldiss said, "What line of work are you in, Mr. Calloway?" "I range," James said. Aldiss looked at him for a moment. He understood enough to know that pressing it further would tell him less, not more. He looked at Ruth for the first time. "My offer stands, Mrs. Calloway." "You think carefully on it," he rode out. 5 men behind him. Ruth watched them go. Then she said, "He'll find out who you are." "He already suspects," James said. "He just doesn't know yet that it won't help him." He rode out alone that afternoon and did not tell her where he was going. Ruth spent the hours of his absence in Daniel's office, going through the account ledger with the same careful attention she had given the letter, looking not for what was recorded, but for what was absent, for the gaps and silences that said more than the entries. Daniel's ledger was meticulous. His numbers were precise, his hand the same steady print at the end of a long day as at the beginning of a fresh one. But in the 4 months before his death, 2 payments had been logged under initials she did not recognize. WDC, logged as income, not expense. Small amounts, the kind that might not catch an eye that wasn't looking for them. When James came back at dusk, Ruth had the ledger open on the desk. "Sit down," she said. "I need to show you something." She walked him through it, the same way she had walked herself through it. He listened with the particular attentiveness of a man who had spent years gathering information in places where the wrong question got you killed. When she finished, he said, "WDC Judge Warren D. Croft," Ruth said, "not Delaney. I was wrong about which judge. There's a Warren D. Croft in the territorial circuit." James turned back several pages. He pointed to the direction of the notation. "Look at how it's entered," he said. "That's income, not a payment Daniel made. A payment someone made to Daniel." Ruth stared at the entry. She had read it 4 times and missed that entirely. "For what?" "For the use of his name," James said. "My guess is Croft was passing the altered survey through legitimate hands, using Daniel's credentials as a registered county surveyor to lend the filing credibility on paper. And when Daniel realized what was being done with his name, he stopped cooperating and started documenting," Ruth said. They sat across the desk from each other in the fading light, with a dead man's careful handwriting between them. "He knew they would come for him," Ruth said. It was not a question. James was quiet. "He knew," Ruth said again, flatly. "And he did not tell me." Her voice did not rise. It was simply the most exact thing she had ever heard herself say. "He did not tell me. I was his wife, not a child to be sheltered. If he had told me, we could have gone somewhere together. We could have gotten the documents out, gotten them to someone Croft couldn't reach." She stopped. "I know why he didn't." She folded the ledger shut. "And he was wrong anyway." James did not argue with her. He looked at the desk. "What did you find this afternoon?" Ruth asked. He had ridden the upper powder boundary. The original federal survey stakes were still there, most of them. 2 had been moved. Not far, just enough to shift the line on paper. He had taken measurements, documented the original sockets in the ground where the stakes had stood. "It's not enough alone," he said. "But with Daniel's letter, and the ledger, He paused. We need someone who knows land and water law. Someone who can build a case that survives a judge. Not Croft and not anyone in Croft's orbit. The federal land commissioner holds session in Harwick in January, Ruth said. Commissioner Abel Stokes. Daniel mentioned him once. Said he was one of the few men in the territory who had never taken a dollar he didn't earn. January is 6 weeks. Yes, that's a long time to keep Aldiss patient. He's not patient, Ruth said. He's methodical. There is a difference. He will move when he believes the moment is right, when he believes there is no one left who will ask questions. She looked at her brother-in-law across the desk. We have to make sure the moment never looks right. Aldiss's men did not come the following morning, or the morning after. Ruth knew better than to treat the silence as relief. She walked the fence lines twice each day and counted the cattle and watched the ridge above the east pasture with the same attention she had been giving the lane. A man like Aldiss did not withdraw because he had changed his mind. He withdrew because he was repositioning. On the 5th day of silence, her neighbor Edna Marsh rode over on her bay horse and tied up at the porch without ceremony. Edna was a widow of 61, with a mind like a land survey, precise and without sentiment, who had run her own spread alone for 11 years and had never once asked anyone's permission for anything. She looked at Ruth and then at the bunkhouse and said, I heard James Calloway was here. He is. Good. She sat down on the porch steps without being invited, because Warren Aldiss was at Haverford's store in town yesterday asking about a man. Lean, dark, late 30s, quiet. Said he was trying to place a face he'd seen out on the valley road. Ruth felt something tighten behind her ribs. Did anyone know him? Edna's expression said everything. Nora Fitch was in the store. Nora Fitch had a memory for people and no particular policy about what she did with it. She had seen James ride through the valley 2 years prior, during a cattle drive. She knew who he was. How long before Aldiss knows? Ruth asked. By morning, Edna said. If he doesn't already. Ruth looked toward the bunkhouse. Thank you, Edna. Don't thank me. Daniel was a good man, and Aldiss is a snake, and those are the only 2 facts I need. Edna gathered her reins. You watch yourself. Both of you. Ruth told James that evening over supper. He sat with it for a moment, the way he sat with most things, letting it settle before he spoke. It changes the timing, he said, not the direction. If he knows who you are, he won't wait 6 weeks. No. Then we need to get the documents to Stokes, or to someone in his office, before Aldiss decides to move. He looked at her steadily. Do you trust Edna Marsh? With my life? Then here is what we do tonight. He told her. She listened. She made a copy of Daniel's original water rights survey by lamplight, sitting at the desk with the original beside her and Daniel's drafting tools in her hands. She was not a surveyor, but she had spent 6 years keeping the accounts for Calloway Creek, and she had steady hands and a precise eye. And when she held the copy next to the original at 2 in the morning, she believed that a man searching in a hurry might not immediately see the difference. She rode to Edna's before sunrise. Edna opened the door before she reached the porch. She looked at Ruth's face, and then at the document and said, Come in. Ruth explained it quickly. Edna listened. Then the old woman went to the bedroom and came back with a flat tin box, the kind used for storing seed stock, and she placed the original document inside it and put the tin box under the floorboards beneath the iron bed frame and set the braided rug back over the boards and stood up. He won't find it here, Edna said. And I'll deny knowing anything about a survey until I'm standing in front of a judge who has the authority to make it matter. Ruth rode home as the sun was coming up. James was on the porch with his coffee. She gave him one nod as she dismounted. He gave her one back. It was enough. Warren Aldiss came on a Thursday, alone this time, in the afternoon. Just him. Ruth heard one horse on the lane and understood immediately that the rules had changed. He came up to the porch without hurry. He looked at James. He said, I know what you did in Laramie, Calloway. Before that, Deadwood. I know who you worked for. Then you know I'm thorough, James said. I know you're here without any badge or authority, just family business. Family business, James said, is the kind a man doesn't leave unfinished. Aldiss looked at Ruth. He said he was going to be honest with her. He said there was a water rights document that her husband had apparently believed gave Calloway Creek a claim over the Upper Powder diversion point. He said that document contained survey errors. He said he had a certified filing from Judge Croft's office confirming the correct boundary. He said if she took her version to a court, she would spend money she didn't have and lose. Ruth said, "Is that what happened to Daniel? He tried to take it to court?" The air went flat. Aldiss's expression did not change. That was the tell. It stayed precisely as composed as it had been, the expression of a man who had spent years practicing stillness in the face of things that should have moved him. "Your husband had an accident," he said. "He had it," Ruth said, "on the same stretch of river you're claiming water rights to. He had it after he found a survey document proving the filing was fraudulent. He had it before he could take that document anywhere." She took one step forward. "That is a considerable series of accidents, Mr. Aldiss." Aldiss looked at her for a long moment. Then at James. "My offer expires at the end of this week," he said quietly. "It expired the morning you made it," Ruth said. He put his hat on. He walked to his horse. He mounted without hurry. He looked at them both from the saddle, and what was on his face now was not the silver-templed warmth. It was something older and flatter, the face beneath the performance. "Whatever you think you have," he said. "It won't hold." He rode out. James turned to look at Ruth. "He knows we have something. He suspects," Ruth said. "And there is a difference." She looked down the empty lane. "He doesn't know Edna has the original. He thinks it's here. He's going to come for it." "Yes," James said. "Let him come." They came that night. Not Thursday. Friday. Past 2 in the morning, when the Powder River Valley had gone to that deep, cold silence that has its own weight, its own texture. The silence of a world that has stopped waiting and started holding its breath. Ruth was not asleep. She had not slept through a full night since Daniel died. She lay in the dark and listened to the ranch, the way Daniel had always listened to it, not for any particular sound, just for the shape of the quiet, so that when something shifted she would feel it before she could name it. She felt it at 2:17. The horses in the barn went quiet in a way that was different from sleep, the particular silence of animals that have found something with their noses. She was out of bed before the thought finished. Boots, dress, the revolver from the nightstand. She counted what she could see from the bedroom window. 2 horses tied at the back fence, away from the house. 1 shape moving near the bunkhouse. 1 already on the porch. She needed James. James was in the bunkhouse, which was where one of them already was. Ruth stood in the dark and made herself think, not react. Think. The man on the porch tried the front door. It was barred. He tried it twice. Then she heard him move toward the office window. She moved faster. Down the back hall. Through the kitchen. The shotgun from beside the door. Back flat against the kitchen wall. The office window gave with a sound like a branch snapping. Then she heard footsteps in the office, cautious and quick, the sound of hands on the desk, drawers opening. From the bunkhouse, a shout cut short, a crash. Then James's voice, low and entirely controlled. "Don't." Just that word. Ruth breathed. She heard the man in the office find the copy of the survey, heard him unfold it, heard the paper settle. She stepped into the office doorway and said, "Don't move." He moved. He came at her fast. Ruth stepped left instead of back, because back was what he expected, and the edge of his arm caught her shoulder instead of her face, and she went hard into the doorframe but kept the shotgun. She came up with it before he could turn around. "Put the paper on the desk," she said. He put it on the desk. "Now go out the window you came in." He went. She stood with the shotgun at her shoulder until she heard him hit the ground and run, and heard horses at the back fence moving fast. Then quiet. Then James was in the doorway, a cut above his right eye, his hand pressed to his ribs, but standing and steady and with the same expression he always had. That particular, infuriating calm that she was beginning to understand was not the absence of feeling, but the disciplined management of it. "2 at the bunkhouse," he said. "They won't be a problem. Are they alive?" "Yes," he said. "I didn't kill anyone." Ruth set the shotgun against the wall. Her hands were shaking now with the delayed kind of shaking, the kind that comes after, when the body catches up to what the mind has already survived. She looked at her hands. She made them stop. "He took the copy," she said. "Good," James said. She crossed the room and looked at the cut above his eye. She cleaned it without ceremony, and he sat still under her hands without complaint. "He'll have it to Aldiss by morning," Ruth said. "Aldiss will know by noon it's a copy. Maybe not right away. The notarization is in the right place. The measurements are close enough. He paused. Close enough to buy us a day. 1 day. 1 day is enough, James said. Something in his face had sharpened into the specific, clear-edged aliveness of a man who has been moving towards something for a long time and can finally see the ground in front of him. We're going to Harwick tomorrow. Not January, Ruth said. Not January, James said. Tomorrow. We find out where Stokes is before his scheduled session. They left before sunrise. Ruth rode to Edna's first while James waited on the lane. She retrieved the original from under the bedroom floorboards, and Edna held her hands for one moment in the gray pre-dawn and said, "Go. Come back." They rode south toward Harwick in the early morning. The Powder River Valley rose and fell around them in the cold light, and Ruth thought about Daniel, who had loved this exact hour of this exact landscape. She kept that thought and rode. The land commissioner's office in Harwick was a small building on the north end of the main street, 2 blocks from the courthouse where Judge Croft's clerk had an office, and Aldiss had a business account at the Territorial Bank. Ruth knew the layout. She also knew which end of the street to avoid. The deputy commissioner was a slight man of about 45 named Harold Pruitt, who had the careful eyes of someone accustomed to reading documents that said one thing while meaning another. He looked up when they came in, and his face did a rapid series of things. When he recognized the situation, the widow, the documents, the man beside her, who moved like someone with credentials even when he wasn't carrying any. "Mrs. Calloway," Pruitt said. He had known Daniel. He had processed the original Calloway water rights filing 8 years ago. "I've been meaning to write," he said. "I need to see the Aldiss water rights filing," Ruth said. "The 1,889 filing on the Upper Powder diversion. All of it." Pruitt came out from behind his counter and looked out the window at the street, and then came back and said, very quietly, "How much do you know?" "Enough to be here." "What do you know that I don't?" Harold Pruitt had the expression of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been given permission to set it down. He went to the back of the office and returned with a ledger and opened it on the counter. "Your husband came to me in September," he said, 2 months before the accident. He asked me the same questions. I showed him the Aldiss filing. He looked at the survey numbers and said the eastern diversion marker was off by 140 yards. "It is," Ruth said. Pruitt nodded. "I know. I knew when the filing came in, but the notarization carried Croft's seal." He stopped. "There are things in this territory that a man with a family and a position he needs to keep does not push on. My husband pushed on it," Ruth said. Pruitt looked at the ledger. "Yes," he said. "He did." The silence in the room had the quality of a confession that had been waiting for years to be given. James said, "Is there a record of the original federal water grant for the Calloway parcel?" "Yes." Pruitt brought a second ledger, older, its spine cracked with age. He opened it on the counter. "The diversion point," he said. "It's described here. The boundary language is explicit." Ruth looked at the entry, then at James. "It matches Daniel's documents exactly," James said. Pruitt reached into his vest pocket and placed a folded paper on the counter between them. "Your husband left this with me in September. He said if anything happened to him, and someone came asking, I should give it to that person." Ruth's hand was on the paper before she decided to move. She unfolded it. Daniel's handwriting, dated September the 14th. "If you are reading this, something went wrong. What I have written below is a true account of what Warren Aldiss and Judge W.D. Croft have done with the Upper Powder water rights, and what they tried to pay me to ignore, and what I refused. I refused because the water doesn't belong to me to give away, and the silence isn't mine to keep. The survey record is in my desk. Ruth doesn't know yet. I am going to tell her when I have more to show her alongside it. I should probably have told her already. She is steadier than I have always shown her, I believe, and smarter, and she will see this through." Ruth stood at the counter of the Harwick land office and read her husband's handwriting, and she did not cry. She had made herself a promise about that, but it cost her more in that moment than anything else had cost her in 3 months. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. "Pruitt," she said, and her voice was entirely steady. "Is there an emergency filing procedure with the land commissioner's office? Something that would bring Stokes here before January?" Pruitt thought for a moment. "There is a federal interference protocol," he said carefully. "If a party can demonstrate active interference with a valid federal land grant, including falsification of filed documents, The commissioner can convene an emergency review that bypasses the local circuit entirely. What do we need? The original grant record, which is here and I can certify today. A sworn statement from someone with direct knowledge, the survey documentation, and something demonstrating active interference. Fraud in a filing. Destruction of evidence. Something of that weight. Ruth thought of the copy sitting in Aldiss's hands right now. She thought of the man who had gone through her office window. She thought of the 2 men tied in the bunkhouse at Callaway Creek. I have 2 men who broke into my home last night, she said. I have a neighbor who watched Aldiss's riders come to my fence for 5 weeks. I have my husband's letter and his survey records and your original grant ledger. Pruitt straightened slightly. Give me 2 hours. You have 1, Ruth said. She stood at the counter and watched Pruitt work while James waited outside. She thought about Daniel sitting at this same counter in September, handing Pruitt the folded letter, riding home to a wife he had decided not to tell yet. She thought about all the evenings she had noticed him staring at the middle distance and had let him be, had trusted his judgment about what needed saying and when. She was not going to do that again, with anyone. Ever. She heard the door behind her and thought it was James. It was not James. Judge Warren D. Croft was 62, silver-haired, and carried authority in his body the way some men carry fat. Not consciously, just accumulated by long habit. He was in his town clothes, not his court clothes. The man beside him wore a deputy's badge and an expression that had been trained to look like nothing. Croft looked at Ruth. He looked at the ledgers open on the counter. He looked at Pruitt. Mrs. Calloway, he said. I heard you were in town. Judge, Ruth said. He said he had also heard she'd had some trouble at the ranch. Said it with a face composed entirely of concern, the most precisely calculated false thing she had seen since Warren Aldiss's smile. The federal process doesn't run through your court, Ruth said. The temperature in the room changed. Croft looked at Pruitt. Something passed between them that was older and heavier than a word. Pruitt's hand tightened on the pen. Don't, Ruth thought. Harold, don't. Pruitt set the pen down. He picked up the certified copies and the original grant ledger, and he looked at Judge Warren Croft across the counter, and he said, in a voice that was not entirely steady, but was absolutely clear, These are public land records, Judge. I am authorized to produce them on request. The filing protocol has been initiated. Croft looked at him for a long moment. You understand what you're doing, he said. I understand what I'm doing, Pruitt said. Ruth took the documents from the counter and put them inside her coat. She turned to face Croft directly. My husband found out what you and Aldiss were doing, she said. He documented it, and he died for it. I have his documentation. I have his letter. I have your initials in his account ledger, entered as income he received for the use of his name in a fraudulent filing. She held Croft's gaze without moving. I am going to file all of it with the Federal Land Commissioner's office, and you do not have enough reach in this territory to stop that from happening. You're making an enemy of a man you can't afford, Croft said. You were already my enemy, Ruth said. You made yourself that the morning my husband went into the Powder River. I'm simply the only one in this room willing to say it in plain language. She walked to the door. The deputy shifted his weight. Just slightly. A suggestion. The door opened from the outside. James stepped in. He looked at the deputy. He looked at Croft. He said nothing. He simply stood in the doorway with that quality of stillness that Ruth now understood entirely. Not patience. Its precise opposite. Everything held exactly at the point of release, waiting only for the moment. The deputy stepped back. Croft looked at James Calloway for a long moment, then at Ruth. This isn't finished, he said. No, Ruth said, but it's closer to finish than it was this morning. She walked out into the Harwick Street with Daniel's letter against her heart and 3 certified copies inside her coat and the original survey at Edna Marsh's house 2 hours north. The street was moving with ordinary commerce, and someone was laughing somewhere down the block, and the world was entirely, impossibly, continuing. James fell into step beside her. Croft will send word to Aldiss within the hour, he said. I know, Ruth said. Aldiss will know the copy was a copy. I know that too. They walked. The cold air moved around them. Then we need to be ready, James said. Ruth looked straight ahead down the Harwick Street. We are ready, she said. And she meant it down to the bone. Whatever Aldiss sent next, Callaway Creek would be standing when it was over. She was going to make certain of it. What came next, in the end, was not what either of them had expected. Commissioner Abel Stokes convened the emergency review 12 days later in the Harwick Federal Building, and the room was 3 people deep against every wall, because word had moved through the Powder River Valley the way it moves in country, where everyone knows everything and has been afraid to say it aloud for a very long time. Fast and electric, and with the particular energy of a community that has been waiting for someone to go first. Aldiss was there with 2 lawyers from Cheyenne. Croft was there alone, seated at a side table, and what was on his face was not the composed authority Ruth had seen in Pruitt's office. The assumption was gone. What remained was a man of 62 in a federal room with no more road in front of him. Stokes was 70, spare and gray, with the face of a man who had spent his career listening to people misrepresent land records and had long since developed an instrument for detecting it that never failed. He opened with Pruitt's testimony. Pruitt took the stand and testified with the relief of a man setting down a weight he had carried too long, walking through the original Callaway water grant, the Aldiss filing, the discrepancy in the survey numbers, Daniel's visit in September, the letter. He answered every question. Aldiss's lawyers objected 5 times. Stokes sustained none of them. When Pruitt finished, Stokes looked at the room over his glasses. Then he said, "I want to address one matter before we continue." He looked at the respondents' table. The original federal grant for the Callaway water rights places the Upper Powder diversion point 141 yards east of the location described in the 1889 Aldiss filing. The discrepancy is not consistent with survey error. It is consistent with deliberate alteration. He folded his hands. "I will hear from all parties on that subject. We will begin with the federal witness." The Federal Land Office representative stood. The commission calls Edna Marsh. Ruth had not known what to expect. She had imagined someone diminished by the formality of it. The old woman from the valley made small by the federal room. What came through the door was Edna Marsh, exactly as she always was. 61 years old, with a straight back and the unhurried manner of a woman who had been doing difficult things her entire life and saw no reason to be theatrical about it now. She sat in the witness chair. She looked at the room. She did not look at Aldiss. "Mrs. Marsh," the representative said, "were you acquainted with Daniel Callaway?" "I was," Edna said, "for 6 years. He was a good man and a good neighbor and the most careful surveyor in this valley." "Were you present when events at Callaway Creek took place in the weeks following his death?" "I was," Edna said, and she told it. She told it plainly and completely, without drama or embellishment, with the spare precision of a woman who had lived a long time in a place that required you to see things clearly and say what you saw. The riders at the fence line, the gate opened 3 times, the night the men broke into Ruth's house, the document she had kept under her bedroom floorboards. Aldiss's lawyers spent 20 minutes on cross-examination looking for a crack. There was no crack. The truth has a structural integrity that a fabricated account does not have, and Stokes watched the attempt with the expression of a man watching something he had seen many times and remained unimpressed by. When it was over, Stokes looked at the respondents' table. "Mr. Aldiss, your attorneys will advise you that what happens in the next several minutes will determine the shape of a considerable number of years to come. I suggest you use that time wisely." Aldiss looked at Croft. It was the look of a man watching something he had built fall, with the cold fury of someone who had always understood his structure was built on rotten ground and had gambled it would hold long enough. It had not held long enough. His lead lawyer leaned in and spoke quietly. Aldiss listened. Then Croft's lawyer stood up before Croft was even called. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "my client wishes to address the commission directly." "On what subject?" "On the subject of his role in certifying the 1889 Aldiss water rights filing." The room moved. Nobody stood up, but something shifted in the air. A collective breath held and then released. The realignment of a community that had been waiting for exactly this. Stokes said, "The commission will hear it." Croft stood. He was still silver-haired, still bearing, but the posture that had walked into Pruitt's office like a man who owned the building was gone. What remained was just a man in a federal room with the end of his options visible. In the spring of 1889, Croft said, "Warren Aldiss brought me a water rights filing he represented as a correction of a survey error on the Upper Powder boundary. He indicated the original federal survey had contained a drafting mistake. He produced what appeared to be supporting documentation. I certified the filing, without independently verifying the survey numbers against the original federal grant. He paused. I subsequently learned the representation was false. I allowed the filing to stand. I permitted pressure to be applied to Daniel Calloway to prevent him from challenging it. He paused again. Longer. I am prepared to provide a complete account and to cooperate fully with any federal proceeding. He sat down. The room broke. Stokes called for order twice before he got it. When he had it, he looked at Aldiss's table with an expression that required no translation. "Mr. Aldiss," he said, "your attorneys have approximately 5 minutes." Aldiss's lead lawyer leaned in. Aldiss listened. His face did not change, not with emotion, but with the particular reconfiguration of a man who is not surrendering, but who is deciding what to protect when everything else is already gone. He said, "For the record, I dispute every material claim made in this proceeding." Stokes looked at him over his glasses. "Noted," he said, "and noted that you are disputing them here in a federal forum on the public record, which is exactly where such disputes belong." He turned to look at the room. "The water rights to the Upper Powder diversion point," Stokes said, "revert to the Calloway estate effective immediately pending the formal order, which I will sign before I leave this building today. The 1889 Aldiss filing is voided in its entirety. All infrastructure or improvements made by the Aldiss operation at the diversion point since 1889 constitute trespass against a federal water grant and are subject to remedy." He looked at the federal representative. "I am referring the matter of Daniel Calloway's death to the federal marshal's office for criminal investigation." He looked at Croft's lawyer. "Your client's cooperation will be considered. His conduct will be investigated." He looked at Aldiss one final time. "Mr. Aldiss, I would not leave this territory." He stood. The room stood with him, and the sound that came up was not applause. It was something lower and more complicated than applause. The sound of 40 people in a valley, exhaling something they had been holding since November. Ruth sat at the petitioner's table and did not move for a long moment. She needed 60 seconds in which nothing was required of her. No composure, no steadiness, no careful management of what she let show. Just 60 seconds in which she was a woman sitting in a chair with her husband's name entered into a federal record and the beginning of justice taking the shape it should have taken months ago. Pruitt came and held her hand without speaking. Edna appeared and sat beside her and put an arm around her shoulders and said nothing at all, which was exactly right. James stood a little distance away and gave her the space she needed, watching her the way he had watched the riders at the fence line that first morning, with complete and patient attention. When she was ready, she stood. She looked at him. He crossed the room and held out his hand. Open. The way you offer a hand to someone you mean to walk alongside. She took it. They walked out of the Harwick Federal Building into the December cold, and the street parted for them without being asked, and Ruth looked up at the Powder River sky, the same sky she had stood beneath the morning. She became a widow, gray and vast and indifferent. She thought, all right. The formal order arrived at Calloway Creek on a Thursday. Ruth read it at Daniel's desk. Every line, every legal notation, the same care she had brought to the ledger, and the letter, and the survey. Because Daniel had taught her, not in so many words, but in everything he had shown her in 6 years, that the language of a thing was the difference between something that held and something that could be undone. It held. She put it in the deed box. She put the key in the pocket of her dress. Then she went out to where James was repairing the south fence line, working with the steady efficiency of a man who had grown up doing exactly this kind of work, and had never entirely lost the instinct for it, no matter how far he had ranged. "It's done," she said. He looked up. The order came. "The water rights are ours. The marshal's office confirmed the investigation is open." She paused. "Croft signed his full cooperation statement yesterday." James straightened. He looked at her with the expression she had come to know best on his face, the one that was not the controlled calm but the thing underneath it, simply him, simply who he was. "Daniel did that," he said. "He built the case before any of us got here." "We finished it," Ruth said. "Yes," he said. "We did." She sat down on the fence rail and looked out at the Upper Powder, at the water moving cold and clear in the December light. Her water. Her land. The land Daniel had surveyed and documented and died trying to protect. "Elias," she said. James looked at her. "Stay," she said. She said it simply. The way you say a thing when you have been thinking it long enough that saying it aloud is not a risk, only a fact. This place is too large for one person. Daniel would have wanted you here. And she stopped. I am asking. James looked at the fence line, at the pasture, at the ridge above Callaway Creek where the riders had once sat and watched and found, in the end, nothing they could take. Let me get through the rest of the legal proceedings, he said. After that, Ruth said. He did not say yes. He did not say no. But he went back to the fence and kept working, steady and unhurried. And Ruth sat on the rail in the December cold and watched the water moving over the stones in the upper powder. And she thought about Daniel, who had planted seeds in September, knowing he might not live to see them come up, who had left letters in other men's pockets, and documents in desk drawers, and a case built stone, by careful stone, by a man who loved his land and his wife, and had known, in the end, exactly what he was fighting for. She thought about what it meant to finish something a person you loved had started. Not to replace them, not to put the loss behind you like something to be outrun, but to carry what they built forward into ground they never reached, to tend what they planted, to stand on the land they died for and say, this is real, this is ours, this is not going anywhere. She thought about Edna Marsh riding 2 miles in the dark to hide a document under her bedroom floor. She thought about Harold Pruitt with a pen in his hand and a judge in his doorway saying, these are public records and I am authorized to produce them. She thought about every small, ordinary, unannounced act of courage that had built this outcome. Not the confrontations and the standoffs and the dramatic moments, but the quiet ones. The ones that happened in the space between doing nothing and doing something, when a person looked at what was easy and what was true and chose true. She thought about Daniel, who had chosen true, all the way to the end. Behind her, the sound of fence work continued, steady and real. The Powder River moved over its stones in the cold. The deed was in the box with the key in her pocket, and Ruth Calloway sat in the December sun on the fence rail of the ranch she had held, on the land she had fought for, and she knew with the same bone-deep certainty with which she had always known the things that mattered, that Daniel Calloway had not died for nothing. He had died for this. And this was not going anywhere. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't standing on a porch, facing down 5 riders. It's sitting at a desk at 2 in the morning, going through papers one more time, refusing to let the truth stay buried. Ruth didn't win because she was fearless. She won because she kept choosing true, one quiet decision at a time. That's something any of us can do, starting today. A small note for you, this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you an entertaining listen while leaving behind something worth carrying. The reminder that ordinary courage, chosen quietly and consistently, is more than enough.